Okay, Counselor, you're on.
Thank you, Joe. So let's call the Public Works and Utilities Committee for November 9th to order. Can we have a roll call, please, Ms. Pasula?
Chairman Christopher Rivera,
Here.
Councillor Signe Lindell,
Here.
Councillor Romana Beta,
Here.
Councillor Joanne Vijo Koppler,
Here.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Are you a quorum, Mr. Chair?
Ms. Pasula. Next is approval of the agenda. Any changes from staff?
No changes from Public Works side, Mr. Chair.
No changes
Anything?
from utilities, Mr. Chair.
All right, anything from the committee? All right, I would like to move up item K to the first matter under public comment, just to make best use of our legislative lobbyist, so that we can get him on if there's any questions. If not, then clearly he's done. But if there are questions, we'll move item K up to the first thing under public comment. Anything else from the committee? All right, can I have a motion?
Move to approve as amended.
Seconded.
Motion for approval is amended by Councilor Lindell, second by Councilor Garcia. Any further discussion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Pasula?
Chairman Christopher Rivera,
Yes.
Councillor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Councillor Joanne Vijo Koppler,
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next, approval of the consent agenda. Any changes from staff?
No changes from Public Works, Mr. Chair.
No changes from utilities, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything the committee would like to pull off? Councilwoman Vihel Koppler.
I'd like to pull E, G, and J, and then K.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, seeing nothing else, what are the wishes of the committee?
Move to approve consent.
Second.
A motion for approval by Councilor Garcia, second by Councilwoman Vihel Koppler. Any further discussion? We have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Pasula.
Chairman Christopher Rivera,
Yes.
Councillor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Councillor Joanne Vijo Koppler,
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
and motion passes.
All right, next, approval of the minutes for October 26. Any changes from staff?
No changes from Public Works, Mr. Chair.
No changes from utilities, Mr. Chair.
All right, any changes from the committee?
Move to approve.
Seconded.
A motion for approval of the minutes for October 26 by Councilor Lindell, second by Councilor Garcia. Any further discussion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Chairman Christopher Rivera,
Yes.
Councillor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Councillor Joanne Vijo Koppler,
Yes. Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
and the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Pasula. We're on to public comment. I know Ms. Pasula has a couple emails to read. Again, if it's going to be longer than 2 minutes, I think the email should follow the same rules as actually people speaking, Ms. Pasula. So if you have some emails to read, this would be the time to do it. And then I don't know if there's anybody on the Zoom meeting that I see a couple hands going up from Helen Malinsky and Pat Lillis. So if we can, let's start off with the actual people that are on, and then we'll go to the written documents.
So, Councilor Rivera, this is for to speak in public comment. So folks out there, if you want to speak, please raise your hand and we will get to you for public comment. Okay, Councilor Rivera, the first one up is Pat Lillis. And Ms. Lillis, you are unmuted and can speak.
Hi, hi everybody. I'm Pat Lillis. I'm not very familiar with this process. However, I am familiar with short-term rental laws across the country and in other countries. The short-term rental ordinance that you are currently reviewing or looking over, approving, was only posted to the city's website today. I know I contacted Michael Garcia and I was looking at the old ordinance and nothing was matching up quite right. And so I'm not sure, I've been trying to read it today, actually this afternoon. I'm only on page 8. However, my comment is, it seems like a much watered down version that what was presented in this summer. I believe it was June. The word permit and the word restriction, wait, the two words, I wasn't prepared. I thought I was going to do this at the end of the meeting. Restriction and, help me out, restriction and registration seem to be the key words. They were not separated in the other version. Permit only refers to residential areas. Restriction, I don't have any notes here. The reservation, what is it? Help me, somebody. Okay, page 8. The registration and permit are the key words. So the registration refers to anything that's not residential, which as far as I can tell has no limit. Correct me if I'm wrong. The residential has a limit of 1,000 units. We had 1,000 units before for the whole city. So this is actually an expanded version. I don't see this as a reform. I think the only way that maybe you could reform it is to have a primary residency requirement for residential areas. I think that would be very easy to enforce.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lillis. You have your 2 minutes are up. So thank you for your.
Sorry, it was so disjointed.
That's okay. I think we got most of it. So thank you very much. Who's next, Mr. Abeta?
Next up is Helen Malinsky. And hold on, Helen disappeared for some reason. Oh, here let me get Helen, you're unmuted.
Oh, hello. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay, wonderful.
Go ahead.
So I can begin. So
Yes.
I emailed each of you as well as CCing several of your fellow councilmen and women regarding, as well as Mayor Weber, regarding my comments for tonight. And I wanted to, I'm going to ad lib from them. I'm not going to read that directly. If you want to, you can do so at your leisure whenever you check your email and such. But primarily because I don't want to waste your time, I just want to talk about the suggestions that I'm making, which would be two primary suggestions, which would be effectively reviewing the aspects of the chart committee that have to do with selecting candidates that two individuals with historical, cultural expertise and credentials and or higher education credentials in New Mexico's history and culture, as well as one individual with National Museum or other professional historic interpretation experience. I viewed your meeting from last time and I saw that there was a rather large amount of discussion regarding the museum experience person of choice. And I reviewed the whole thing and I thought these could possibly be consolidated into one position and then possibly pull one position from the three and add it to the at-large. That was one suggestion that I wanted to make and have considered. Another thing was the aspect of the number of people who are interested in participating in this, myself being one, that many of these at-large prospective members could be utilized in some kind of a subcommittee type of arrangement. They could be held for subcommittee secondary consideration list. So I think that was my timer.
Your 2 minutes are up.
Yes, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Melissa. Melissa, you've been unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Melissa Mascareñas, and I am asking if I can please be considered. I've already sent in a letter to this chart committee. I feel it's important that I am on this committee. I was one of the only females that worked with the mayor when we decided to retire the entrada. It was over a 2-year period of working very hard. And I think I bring to the table a lot of information that would help this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Appreciate your comment. Anyone else, Mr. Abeyta?
That's it.
All right, Ms. Pisula, you had a couple of emails. I assume they were from people that didn't comment now.
Oh, I do see some, James has his hand up.
Yeah, it looks like that James just came up.
All right, go ahead and bring him on.
James, you're unmuted and can speak.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, James, you have 2 minutes.
My name is James Borrego. I'm a member of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and we have met with the mayor regarding the chart committee and recent occurrences. And we've also sent letters to the mayor and councilors requesting that a member of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce be included in this chart committee. Our mantra is culture, traditions, and small business. And I feel it is important to us, and I would like to be considered, or a Hispanic Chamber member be considered as a member of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borrego. Anybody else, Joe?
No, sir, I don't see anybody.
All right, Ms. Pisula, the emails.
Okay. I received an email from Adam Steinberg. He states, I've been landscaping in Santa Fe for 30 years. We build lovely outdoor environments to enhance people's homes. Many of my clients can afford to hire us to make these modifications and improvements because they have the added income from doing their short-term rentals with some part of their property. This has become common and important economic engine, contributing highly to the strength of our community. Ramifications of cutting back or severely limiting this engine will not be welcome throughout our town. In light of COVID-19 and our city and state response, I wish you would address the following Also, short-term rentals are far more safe for visitors to reside here than large, high-capacity hotels. COVID-19 and the world's response is likely to change the very nature of everything we do, including the basis of your reasoning for the need to drive this legislation. I especially call out the righteousness of pushing this legislation through at a time when, due to COVID, citizen participation in government is extremely limited and discouragingly difficult. Whose agenda is being met more easily due to this limited involvement of resistance? Is it not fair or accurate to believe you are performing the will of the people when the people have to work extra hard to participate? Why must this be decided now at this time when any effort to encourage the economy of the community safety should be encouraged? And then I do have a public comment. The one of them was from Helen, and it pretty much summarizes what she had stated, so I will skip that one.
All right, we also have another hand up from Chris Leslie Curtis. Joe, do you see that hand up?
I do. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Chris Curtis, you've been unmuted.
Chris, are you with us?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Chris Leslie Curtis. I live at 142 Vaquero Road in Santa Fe. I also have 2 short-term rentals within walking distance to the plaza. I have submitted comments previously, so I would just like to briefly ask the committee to consider our recommendation. I'm also aligned with the Short-Term Rental Alliance, and we would like to see the 7-day restriction removed from the current ordinance. And I would also like to ask that you would remove the 1 permit per natural person. The rebuttal I've been given to that is that I will be grandfathered in. However, I do not believe it's in the best interest of small business and the small business that we've allowed to develop with short-term rentals. And I would like to ask that you remove that particular point of the ordinance, that 1 natural person can only hold 1 permit. I have 2 short-term rentals. I rely on them for income, and I would like the city to please consider that. Thank you for your time and your work on behalf of the city of Santa Fe.
Thank you, Ms. Curtis. I see another hand up for Russ Schrader.
Yes, sir. Russ Schrader, you have been unmuted and can speak.
Are you there, Russ?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you have
Perfect.
2 minutes. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm also with the Short-Term Rental Alliance, and I have a short-term rental on Paseo de la Cuma. And I just wanted to talk about the impact on neighborhoods. There is another short-term rental on my block, and if the 50 or 75-foot restriction were there, I would not have been able to get a license. I've been fortunate. But in my particular case, the house was abandoned. It was completely derelict. It was not a good part of the neighborhood at all. We had to do a complete gut rehab, spent a lot of time, a lot of money into it. We would never have been able to buy it, to renovate it, and to make it an important part of the neighborhood if we did not have the ability to have this short-term rental thing. The short-term rentals are benefiting neighborhoods. We have to keep our properties up to the highest standard. Our competition is a click away, and we really like to be part of the neighbors. We're a set of eyes in the neighborhood, and the neighborhoods can keep a set of eyes on us as well. So I appreciate it if you would not look at a cap of numbers or areas or something that is purely arbitrary, but to look at the positive things that we're contributing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the comment. Any last minute ones, Joe? I see another hand up.
Oh, hold on. Amy Broderick put her hand back down. So I think we're, oh, wait a minute. She put her hand back up. Ms. Broderick, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just reiterate what Russ just said. I am very much opposed to all these extra regulations, and I would appreciate at least a delay on this. And I want to thank you for your time. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bobrick. I see another hand up. Leslie Drobin.
Yes. Ms. Robin, you are unmuted.
Yes.
Hello, my name
Ms.
is.
Drobin, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Richard Woodruff. I'm just using Leslie's computer. We live together at 615 Onate Place in Santa Fe. I have a number of concerns. I will just go through 2 quick ones. And I did send a letter to the commission that kind of outlines my concerns. The first is the 50-foot radius restriction on neighboring short-term rentals. Since that is from the boundary lines of the property, not only would it be difficult to figure out which home actually will get a short-term rental permit, but secondly, it will cut out, especially in our smaller neighborhoods where property lines are 5 feet from each other, it will cut out the opportunity for a number of owners of homes to even be considered for a short-term rental. My second concern is, and I wrote about this as well, that we keep talking about 1,600 short-term rentals in Santa Fe. That is actually not the case, and there's been no study to verify which homes are in the county and which homes are in the city, which homes are rented long-term, meaning more than 30 days, and which homes are rented short-term in need of a permit. So we really don't even understand the size of the problem without doing that analysis. So I'd like you to take that into consideration, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I see another hand up, Joe, from Fran Mayer.
Yes, sir. Fran, you are unmuted.
Hi there. Thank you so
Hi.
much for considering changes to the short-term rental ordinance. Do I need to give you my full name or anything else?
Your name and address for the record.
Yeah, Frances Meyer, 633 Garcia Street. And I'm a short-term rental host. I'm also president of the Short-Term Rental Alliance. We are a group of hosts that abide by the current ordinance, pay taxes, and have come together to present our position on the short-term rental ordinance. I'd like to focus on a couple of things. First of all, please support the Planning Commission's recommendation to change the 1 rental per 7-day period. That is really difficult for short-term rental hosts to manage. It reduces our opportunity to host more people. And we believe, especially given the recent economic impact study, that we contribute very positively to the experience of Santa Fe, not just overall, but in our neighborhoods and in our overall community. The second thing I'd like to point out is that there's a lot of changes contemplated in this ordinance, and the 1 per natural person is really very difficult. I think you've already been apprised of some of the impact it could have between a married couple if someone were to pass away. In addition, other inheritance, what would happen? Would my children not have the ability to inherit a nice property in Santa Fe? I would really hope that they would. And also, per the last speaker's point, the data doesn't really support that people owning lots of them really makes a big difference. There's not that many people who own more than three, really. So we don't think that that really makes much of a difference, and everything together really is burdensome. I think you're going to tell me I'm up to my time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, looks like we're Good to go there, Counselor.
All right, let's close the public comment portion of the meeting.
Sorry, I actually had one more written comment.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's in regards to the short-term rental. It's by Robert Drummond. He states, please understand that my short-term rental business is my sole form of income in New Mexico. Those of us who have permits work hard to comply to city guidance. In a time of exploding homelessness and economic struggle, it's hard to understand why the city is targeting short-term rentals unless there are special interest groups that might gain from an amended ordinance. I ask for the following. 1, please support the changes the Planning Commission recommended on the short-term rental ordinance. 2, please remove the 1-day reservation per 7-day period restriction. The Planning Commission recommended the removal and this restriction is arbitrary and unenforced. 3, please remove the 1 permit per person restriction from the ordinance. Director Isaacson has noted that this is not an issue in Santa Fe and the ordinance will not allow for large corporations or outside investors to get multiple permits anyway. Number 4, and please remove the burdensome record submissions to the city. This takes time and money away from more important projects. 5, explain to us who and how we will be grandfathered if we have existing permits. It is not currently clear. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Pisula. So I think that's it. And again, just for those listening and watching, we allow public comment at the beginning because if we wait till the end, the decisions have already been made, and then you're commenting on an item that's already been approved by this committee. So that's why we put it at the beginning. So just to let that out. All right, we're on item 7, presentation of matters from Public Works, and we have a presentation from Public Utilities, Jesse Roach.
Mr. Chair, there are no presentations from Public Utilities.
Good, thank you. Action items, let's go to item K, which is consideration of a resolution establishing the City of Santa Fe legislative priorities for consideration by the New Mexico State Legislature during the 55th Legislature, State of New Mexico, first session 2021. I believe Councilwoman Vigil Koppler pulled this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to find it, maybe someone else can, but I had a question about, it lists somewhere the occupancy surtax. And I wanted to know what that encompassed. What that encompasses, not sure.
Mr. Chair, councilors, on this call, we have Mark Duran, who's our lobbyist. So I will defer to him to answer that. Mark, if you're available.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. Mr. Chairman, hello, councilors.
Mr.
Hello.
Duran, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I hope everyone is well. I know Jesse just deferred that question to me, but the fact is that this resolution has been put together by staff, and some elements of it for sure are continuations of last year's and even the years before. But I would have to push it back to staff to answer any questions as to what is in there and why it's in there and what it means. Any questions on the legislative session, my views on it, other items, I'm happy to answer, but at the end, I'm going to get this resolution and then understand it entirely myself, and then of course advocate for it entirely during the legislative session.
Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Duran. I wanted to just let everybody know that I did find it on page 5, line 10. So, obviously it's something we support. It's written to support legislation at the state level because that occupancy surtax applies to municipalities across the state. And I just don't know where that occupancy surtax would be derived. Does anybody know?
Mr. Chair, Councilors, this was in last year's legislation, so I can do some research and find out where that came from and more information about it.
Now, it at its face value, it just worries me because for those property owners who occupy their homes, I mean, I'm hoping it's not a tax on us to live in our homes. On the other hand, it could be a occupancy surtax when one builds a home and they have to get an occupancy permit or approval. I don't know if it means that. I'm not really sure, but I think it's something we should know, and I don't feel comfortable later on voting on this without knowing that. Then the other thing that's in here is to remove the 3% tax on second homes. I'm not going to say yes or no that I agree with that because I just, I saw it today, and we really haven't had a discussion with our constituents about this. I've never known that there's been a discussion about this, and so I think there needs to be some dialogue about it before I'm comfortable. I don't know what my constituents think about it, but it just popped up and I noticed it today. Maybe it's been in this resolution for years, but I saw it, so I thought I'd bring it up.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I think what's happened here is that we just continue to support those resolutions that haven't been passed by the legislature in years past. So they just continue to be items that we support or have supported in the past. Some of them continue to stay on, and then some of them, like the one you discussed, could have some more discussion. So they've been resolutions that have been presented, like I said, by councilors probably before you were on, and have just remained there. So that's where a lot of these are coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that on the council as a whole, when we've discussed legislative priorities, we have discussed that it's probably a good practice not to do that, not to be so, accepting of all the past resolutions and such, and that we would embark upon a new way of looking at legislation and things that were really important to us, because I remember even I saying that, we might have too many competing priorities among our city. And so that we would, drill down into the things that are most important. And so if we can't even say what these are, and maybe the best guess is that they are from councils of the past, it seems to me that maybe we ought not include them if we don't know what they are. That's my suggestion. So I don't know if you're ready for amendments. I mean, I do know the removing the 3% tax from second homes, 3% tax ceiling from second homes is a discussion that we should have. It's similar to all of the feedback we're getting on the short-term rental program. I think people would be just as interested in that. Not to say that we would get any of these things that we are supporting, but we ought not put our vote behind, again, legislative priorities that we can't explain.
Yeah, and I think this is all open for discussion. So just like we sat together with Jesse and discussed the amendments for the chart committee, if you want something off of this, I think you go through that same process and you can work with Jesse on those issues that you don't think are pertinent anymore.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other discussion on item K or any questions for Mr. Duran? I'll ask a question. Mr. Duran, I know it's hard to sort of look forward, but what are we sort of expecting from legislative body this year and the changes that have been made and the monies that may potentially be out there, if you even know any of that yet?
Mr. Chairman, I know a little of it, and I appreciate the question. And we are in just tremendously unique times. And so we just completed a major election. The majority stayed the same in the House and the Senate. They pretty much or closely resemble the majorities that existed previously. We have a Democrat-controlled House, Senate, and of course, governor. In the background is speculation as to whether or not our governor would be named to a potential cabinet post and whether she would accept. We do know as of today that she has been asked to be on a transition team. As far as the legislative session, it's a 60-day legislative session coming up, starting on the third Tuesday of January, as every other legislative session starts. The question is whether or not the legislative session will be an in-person legislative session or a virtual legislative session like occurred during the special session during mid-June. I don't know how anyone can say that it's likely to be an in-person session where on a normal legislative day, 4,000 people a day would be entering the state capitol or some number like that. I've heard various numbers. I know that the legislative bodies have been reviewing and entertaining proposals on virtual packages, Zoom, WebEx, Google Meets, others. And they're certainly doing their diligence in preparing for a legislative session to happen virtually, just like it did during the special legislative session. In terms of money, I think one of the misnomers of the legislative session is that as bad as the finances are in the state of New Mexico, because of COVID and because of the price of oil and gas. By the way, the price of oil and gas during the special legislative session was somewhere near around $24 a barrel. These are easy calculations to keep in mind. For every $1 price in the change of a barrel of oil, más or menos, New Mexico's budget is impacted somewhere around $20 million. So for when that price of oil went from 63 all to 17, you can just do the math and see how it affected us. There was a tremendous surge in the price of oil today, and that is positive news. And so from a state revenue picture, I think it's still fair to say it's going to be very, very challenging, and we are going to be running a deficit, and legislators are going to be looking for money. But from a capital outlay standpoint, while we won't have the money that was available in past legislative sessions because the legislators were using excess monies to put into one-time capital outlay projects, the traditional fund for capital outlay, which is interest earned off the state permanent fund that goes to capital outlay, and that fund comes in, and then 5% gets taken off for the tribal infrastructure fund, 5% gets taken off for the colonias, and then there's still a remaining amount of money that gets distributed for capital outlay. That number is ranging somewhere upward of $100 million that would still be available for capital outlay. Now, then you have to go for all the statewide facilities that need repair and renovation. That brings us to what I think will be feasible this legislative session, and that will be to be asking for a moderate amount of money for our citywide priority, and then as many of those district priorities that we potentially would be able to get funded. And so I think there's less capital outlay money than there's been in the past, but there is some. It'll still be a tough revenue situation, but it is improving. We'll see if it continues to improve. At least the price of oil and gas, we know what's happening from a COVID situation. That could surpass everything, right? Even from an oil and gas perspective. Statutorily, a number, whether it's virtual or not, the legislature, without a message or call from the governor, is going to be able to consider any statutory piece of legislation, whether it's financial related or not. And that is going to bring up issues like the passage of recreational cannabis, adult use cannabis, other revenue items such as that, and quite frankly, any other statutory items. So, wow. All of this 60-day legislative session, potentially virtually, we all have our work cut out for us. I'm pretty sure, my guess is we'll be doing it virtually, and how we get our opinions across, our lobbying across, our needs across, our concerns across. We're just going to have to find every avenue to do it, especially if it's over the course of 60 days. So I don't know if you wanted all of that, Mr. Chair, but thanks for the few minutes. I know you have a busy schedule.
It's all good information, Mr. Duran. I have no idea how you lobby virtually, so good luck to you. I think it's going to be a challenge, even though you probably already did in the special session, but I can't even imagine how you do it. So any other questions from the committee? All right, what are the wishes on item K?
Move to approve.
Discussion?
We have a motion for approval. We don't have a second yet to have discussion, so.
I'll second for the purpose of discussion, Mr. Chair.
All right, we have a second. Now discussion, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to suggest that we move this forward with no recommendation, and that we get the answers to the questions that Councilor Vigil-Koppler asked, whether they come to us in all of the council in an email, or that's probably the most reasonable way for that to happen. And then we can consider this once we have that information. I'm a little uncomfortable with it, giving it a recommendation without that information. I think those were good points that you brought up, Councilor.
One thing to remember is we have limited meetings now in November and December, so we need to make sure this is out with enough time for Mr. Duran to start his work on it. So just keep that in mind. But we do have a motion and a second. If there's an appetite for withdrawal, we'll do that. If not, we'll vote on the motion.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councilor.
I'll go ahead and move forward to withdraw my motion.
Is that okay with the second, Councilor Beta?
Yes, thank you.
All right, cool. Do you want to make another motion?
Yeah, Chair, I would move that we move this forward without a recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I believe staff, Mr. Guillen, some of the concerns, and I imagine Councilwoman Vigil-Koppler will have a discussion with you about any other issues. So We'll wait for those to get answered. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? We have a roll call vote. Please, Ms. Priscilla.
Chairman Christopher Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Joanne Vijo Koppler,
Yes,
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
and motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Duran, for joining us here tonight.
Chair.
Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for coming to the meeting tonight. Thank you, Councilor Garcia, for withdrawing your motion. Could we be clear with staff that we'd like to have that information as soon as possible? I don't know if that needs to come out of legal or out of the city manager's office. I'm not sure where, but we need to have it as soon as possible.
I think you just did, Councilwoman, with your comments. I think staff heard it, and we'll get that information out in a timely manner. Thank you. We're on to item E, consideration of a resolution hosting community conversations and establishing a special city committee on cultures, histories, art, reconciliation, and truth. Councilwoman Vijo Koppler, you pull this.
thank you, Mr. Chair. There are several amendments here, and I would just ask direction if you, now I like the way that they're lined up. I'd like to thank Jesse Guillen for that. You know, they're much more understandable, at least to me they are. I'm not sure to everybody else, but I guess I would suggest, unless you want to reconsider something else, that we just go amendment by amendment and have the discussion that maybe we need to have. And then move
Why don't we start, Councilwoman Vijo Koppler, with the amendments that you, myself, and Councilor Garcia have signed on to. If you want to take those and explain them.
Okay. Well, I know they were a culmination of the three of us, so some of them I may have a little bit of amnesia, but I'll start with the first one. On page 1, line 17, insert after plaza, insert the removal of Don Diego de Vargas statue from Cathedral Park and the boarding up of Kit Carson Memorial. I believe this amendment is to prioritize or attempt to prioritize the work of the committee, because it seems that much of the community, the city of Santa Fe, people who have expressed concern, the plaza and Don Diego de Vargas and what the city's going to do about that, seem to garner the most dissatisfaction of what we have now, which is something I think everybody knows. I don't need to go into that, but I think the committee perhaps should start with the item that, or items that are most in people's minds. The plaza is a central gathering place, as is the cathedral right down the street, and it's really not a good thing to continue to see a boarded up and fenced in piece of plywood all around. Oh, and I forgot to mention the Kit Carson Memorial. That's also plywooded up. And so, you know, that's what people see first, and that's what seems to have garnered the worst that's happened in our community in recent days. And the remaining work of this committee is all good, all important, as is in the resolution. but it seems like this is at the forefront of people's minds, and that's the purpose of the amendment. And Councilor Garcia, maybe you may want to add anything to what I've said.
Well, in context, and we're talking about the First Amendment, number 1. Am I correct, Councilor Behill-Coppler? So I think the intention behind that one was this chart committee is bigger than the Plaza obelisk. It's, and that's why we included the Vargas statue and the Kit Carson Memorial. So I think that's why we included that. It's bigger than just the obelisk. It's not just addressing the obelisk. We need to ensure we're addressing everything that's impacting our city, and that's why we included those 2 additional monuments or statue. And then we get on later through, I think, one of the later ones where we give the timetable in regards to prioritizing how we should address the matter.
Thank you for that, because I did mix up number 1 and number 3. So I already kind of said what number 3 was, and thank you for number 1. Number 2.
Just to clarify, number 3 we put on its own amendment sheet, so
Oh, it's still there somewhere. Okay, sorry.
that's a different amendment sheet.
Okay, so remind me if we pulled any of these other ones off too. So number 2 says to strike the trained and insert with mediator dispute resolution training and experience. I think we just wanted to be more impactful about the mediator and make sure that they had experience already, and that they certainly had training in, but experience is important. Does anybody else want to add to that? Okay. Number 3, I already explained. Number 4 on page 2, strike lines 22 and 23 in their entirety. And if someone has the resolution up, I can't find that real quickly. I got 2 laptops going here. I'm afraid to lose everything I already have on them.
Which one are you on, Councilwoman?
I'm on number 4.
Number 4.
Of the number 4, which is on the resolution. It's page 2, lines 22 and 23.
I could read those.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Line 22 and 23, propose guidelines and make recommendations for monuments, remembrances, or works of art for the Santa Fe Plaza.
And that's on page 2.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And so maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, did we delete that because we already put emphasis on it in number 3 and kind of combined it with number 1?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councilor Garcia.
So Councilor Behill-Coppler, we eliminated D because, and that's item D, lines 22 and 23, because it's pretty much covered in B. So item D was talking solely about the plaza, and there's going to be, this issue is much bigger than the plaza in regards to the recommendations. And as you said, with item 3, we kind of really gave the emphasis on the action that needs to be taken on the immediate, and that covers the obelisk on the plaza.
Thank you. And then the next item is item 5, which is on page 3. On line 14, we wanted to strike regular written reports and
Councilwoman, sorry, Behill-Coppler, but we put that on a separate amendment sheet as well. Yeah, so those 2 items are in separate amendment sheets.
Got it. Okay, and then number 6, we did strike 21 members and insert in lieu thereof 19. But then, we realized there are other amendments, including our own, that this number is kind of not going to be necessarily reliable depending on how everything shakes out here. But it's clear that we may end up with 21, and we may end up with, well, we're not going to end up with 19, I don't think. So this amendment may be moot.
Chair, could I?
Go ahead.
on
Heather.
that? I'm sorry, Counselor, to interrupt, but I'm trying to stay as clear as I can on this.
Okay.
Are these all separate amendments, or is this one amendment with these, is it 10 different parts? Because I'm getting a little confused that when the group that's put this together says, no, we put this into a separate thing. It's like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be looking at here. I mean, I've read through all of these. I've seen that there's duplication in parts of it. I mean, it's confusing enough, but I need to try to stay as clear as I can with it. So what?
Okay, so these 10 amendments were updated once again only by removing 2 for separate consideration. And those are down the row in the main attachments. However, according to Jesse Guillen, separating amount doesn't matter because each amendment can be considered on their own merit. So whether they're all on one sheet or on separate sheets, according to our legislative analyst, they're all individual. So that's what happened here. And I guess if we had the luxury of re-edits, this probably wouldn't have happened. So as the chair Rivera stated, some of these have been removed to separate sheets. So there really are only 8.
So are we going to vote on each one of these 8 issues separately?
I think we vote on each page separately. And the reason the other 2 were pulled or into separate sheets was because they were likely, after quality of life, going to generate more discussion than these ones were.
So, Councilor Vihel-Coppler, if you would like me to wait to ask questions, I'm happy to. I'm not trying to interrupt you.
Okay, well, thank you. But I wanted to say that at least in correspondence I read today from our legislative analyst, Jesse Guillen, each one of these would stand on their own merit. But I'm not sure when the answer is that we vote on the entire page. I thought we were going to vote item by item, but I'll continue. Okay.
So let me just clarify. We can vote if no one has any questions or issues with this page, we can vote for all the amendments. But if there's like after a discussion with Councilor Beta and considering his amendments, we don't like 19 members, maybe it is 21, then that portion, number 6, from this amendment sheet can be stricken from the amendments.
Got it.
All right, so it is the entire sheet, but we can pull or disapprove any of the ones that we don't necessarily care for or don't apply.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll move on, continue with item 5. We wanted to, wait, number 5, did we put on a separate sheet?
Yes.
Okay, never mind number 5. Number 6, there we go. That may be a moot point. We were just trying to fix the resolution to comport with the changes that we were suggesting as amendments at the time. Not that we were just unilaterally trying to cut out people. So number 7, we felt like we wanted some emphasis on New Mexico rather than national. Doesn't mean that someone that has national experience can't be a part of the committee, but we believed that it was important to have an emphasis on New Mexico, since that is the root of our traditions, our culture, and our I guess traditions and culture. Then on number 8, I believe this one refers to striking the number of city elected officials from 2 to 1. That was in regard to trying to get the committee as manageable to a manageable number. It is quite a large committee. Then on number 9, strike lines 19 to 21, and I am going to need some help on what page 4, lines 19 to 21.
I can read that, Chair.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Lindo.
One individual with a legal background with regard to the city's laws and policies.
Yes, thank you for that, Councilor Lindell. The rationale behind that was that this committee certainly is going to be staffed, and we, as like any other resolution, we get input from our city attorney's office on matters along the way. And we believed we could have that anyway, that we needed to really make this a manageable committee. And so we didn't believe we were losing out by not having legal advice on the committee, but that advice would be available within our administration. And then number 10, we wanted to increase the number of at-large members from 3 to 4. That's all the explanation I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Vigil Koppler. I don't know if you or Councilor Garcia want to talk about the standalone amendments.
I'll defer to Councilor Garcia.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to pull them up that Jesse sent to us one by one. And so the first one is going to be in regards to the meeting frequency. So we're proposing strike regular and insert at minimum, and after updates, insert public presentations every other month. And so the purpose and intent of that amendment is to, at minimum, have the council have written updates from the committee, but then every other month have a presentation be given to the entire governing body at a council meeting. And that way, one, we can have real-time updates, potentially be able to ask questions, but also be transparent for the public, so the public can understand what's going on at minimum every month. I know in our prior committee, there was some conversation in regards to presentations and length, etc. I think that's something where we can be flexible with the committee on. We're not necessarily requiring an in-depth 45-minute presentation on what's happening. I think that's where, as this committee gets revolving, we'll understand what's happening, and presentations can be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but nothing at length, ad nauseum. But we felt it was important for us to have those updates in a timely fashion. That way we're knowing as a governing body what's going on with the committee. That way we can be responsive to constituents. But then we also wanted those in public presentations as well. And so I don't know if I want to defer to the chair, Councilor Vigil Koppler, to give any more kind of overview of that.
I think we've updated this. So the initial proposal, and I don't know if you said this, Councilor Garcia, was to do a monthly presentation by the committee, but Quality of Life thought that that was too aggressive and wanted a quarterly report. We spoke about it and thought a bi-monthly report would suffice. So that's where we're at on that. And then with regards to the last amendment that we put on a separate sheet, which talks about recommendations for monuments, remembrances, or works of art for the Santa Fe Plaza, beginning with the Soldiers Monument, the obelisk, within 6 months of the committee's first meeting. And in our discussions, we felt that it was important to address the obelisk first and as quick as possible. So that one didn't change, but it is on its own amendment sheet. Again, anticipating that might generate more discussion than the other amendments that we had. So those are the 3 amendments proposed by Councilwoman Vigil Coppler, Councilor Garcia, and myself. Let's give Councilor Beta some time to talk about his amendments, and then we'll try to wrap it all up together. So Councilor Beta, do you want to take some time to talk about your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first, there's 2 amendment sheets. The first is 1,000 or 10,000.1A, which is item 1 on page 4, line 22, strike 3 and insert in lieu thereof 2. But that amendment, I think we should probably withdraw, or I'd be willing to withdraw, because as Councilwoman Vigil Coppler said, I think the number of the committee ultimately is going to change depending on how the amendments go. So I'm not really too concerned about whether it's 3 or 2 members. And then on line 4, page 4, line 24, insert the following new paragraph: 1 individual to be nominated by the Santa Fe County Board of Commissioners. My concern there, or the reason I propose the amendment, is because I think we ought to consider 1 individual that they recommend to us. Now, I know they can all send us names of people that are interested, but I think they should act as a commission and be allowed to have 1 person appointed to the board. Because my concern is they can send us names and then we could end up not appointing anybody that they recommend without language like this. And I don't know that we want to send that message to them that, yeah, thanks for the names and recommendations, but we're not, we're going to go with who we want. So that was the intent on that amendment. So that would be that amendment sheet. Again, that on the bottom is A. The other amendments are on sheet 10255.4C. The first on page 4, line 2, after the period, insert the following new sentence: at least 8 members of the committee shall be persons nominated by members of the governing body. And depending on who ultimately makes up or makes the final decision on who sits on this committee, I thought it was important that all of us as city councilors would have say on who would be on this committee. Item 2 is on page 4, line 6. After the word Mexico, insert 2 of which must be based in Santa Fe County. This was based on discussions at our last Public Works, where we want to make sure that the organizations are based in Santa Fe County and not in some other part of the state or country for that matter. Not that that would happen, but this makes it clear that we want organizations from Santa Fe. Item 3 is on page 4, line 21, strike 1 individual with mediator dispute resolution training and experience, and insert in lieu thereof a member of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Board or a nominee selected by the Mayor's Youth Advisory Board. I think it's really important that we get the input from our youth. As we know, our youth doesn't stay our youth in 4 to 8 years, depending on the age. They will be adults in our community. And I think they bring an interesting perspective to this whole discussion. If I just look back at my upbringing, my grandmother's position on something like this was far different than my father's. And then ours has been different from our parents, and our children have a different perspective. And so I think it's important that we try to get everybody's voice heard. And that's the intent of item 3. And then item 4 on page 5, line 17, after the period, insert the following new sentence: The appropriation shall include funding for a mediator with dispute resolution and restorative justice training and experience. And the restorative justice line actually was recommended by Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez due to the specialized training that comes with somebody who not only is experienced with dispute resolution, but specifically restorative justice training. Those are my amendments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. So in just looking at your amendments, your last amendment that you read about mediator training and restorative justice probably goes along and expands our number 2. So
Yes,
we could,
but this was specific to funding, so I wanted to make sure that this was a paid position. I think that's the only difference, but yeah, it's in line with what you're suggesting on your amendment.
okay, so we may be able to strike our number 2. And then do you think we can get this done with 19 members, or do you think with the addition of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee and then the one from the Santa Fe County appointee that it would need to stay at 21?
Mr. Chairman, maybe we have to stay at 21, but like Councilwoman Vigil Koppler said, I think as we further define this resolution, we're going to land up somewhere in between 19 or 21. But I just don't know, especially with all the different amendments.
All right, so then with that, maybe we don't put a number. Maybe we delete our number 6, which really limits a number from 21 to 19. And maybe we look at just leaving it alone until we can fit all the other people into it. I think it's going to be right around there, 19 to 21, but to specifically say 19 may not be what we want. I don't know if Councilwoman Vigil Koppler or Councilor Garcia, you agree or don't agree with that?
Mr. Chair?
Councilwoman Vigil Koppler?
I'm not sure that the resolution should have a number because it all is in the type of person or persons that the resolution states that we should have on this committee. So, you know, it is what it is after it's all said and done, how many people are on it. I think the purpose, the premise of all of the numbering that we're doing on this committee is that we just didn't want it to be so large because it's proven that such large committees sometimes aren't as effective as committees that are of lesser members. But you know, it's an important subject, and there's many people that have backgrounds that perhaps we need to have on this committee. So I think the number will shake itself out. We may end up wanting to even delete that whole sentence. But there isn't an amendment for that here yet, and we can't really determine that till the end. But I do want to make a couple of comments because my name is on this as well. May I proceed?
Yes.
Okay. I too raised the issue that I believe that the city council needed to have one appointee to this committee. That is originally why I wanted to co-sponsor this amendment, the very first one. And I think it's important that I like the language of this because I think it's important that we are guaranteed that we get to make one appointment, not a recommendation, but you know, we can give the name, but it's pretty much that name. And I just don't want that to be whittled down anytime in the future. The other, and I support the rest of them. The number 4, I think the discussion too was that we've believed that the mediator, at least in Councilor Garcia and Councilor Rivera's amendment and mine, that the mediator facilitator shouldn't be a member of the committee per se. They are there with the job to do. They are to bring people to agreements and further the progress of the group. And that person and position is going to be very important because with such a large committee, they're going to have major skills at doing that. I know there are some very, very good mediators out there. And hopefully, we can find some with restorative justice, but I don't know that, someone could have restorative justice experience and training, but they may not be the best mediator around. So, and so I'm not sure how we'll vet this. It kind of gets it down to some finite people. If there are persons or a person that's a great mediator and has all this experience in the justice component, I'm hoping that would be the case. But I don't know that we should limit everything so much. I know that I guess the important point is that this facilitator is not a member of the committee. They are there to do a job. So I guess that's my point.
Yep. And I agree with that as well. And I think the initial resolution had a mediator actually on the committee. So you're correct in that. Any other questions? I think we're really close. I think we're all kind of on the same page on this. Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. On my sheet, the amendments that Councilor Beta went through are co-sponsored also by the rest of this committee except for me. Is that true? I mean, those are not specifically Councilor Beta's. You're signed on to them. Councilor Garcia signed on, and so is Councilor Vigil Coppola. I'm just trying to be clear on this.
No, you're right. Councilor Abeta sent his in via email, and I believe Councilor Garcia, Vigil Coppola, and myself actually had a Zoom meeting with Jesse. So that's probably why the two, but I think we all agreed to the same ideas and concepts.
Okay. I want to just go over a couple of things with it. I'm not sure that I think that it's such a great idea for each counselor to nominate someone. And I want to be clear that the way that this reads, because I know Councilor Vigil Coppola, you just mentioned this, the way this reads is it's strictly a nomination. It's not an appointment. And I think that it's important that we see that, and that the way the rest of this reads, the selection will be done by the chairs of the three major committees and the mayor. So I just want to clarify that the way that's written, that it is a nomination, and there would be no guarantee that those folks would be appointed.
Mr. Chair, on that point.
Councilor Garcia.
I think what Councilor Lindell is referring is to an amendment that Mayor Weber put forth. So we've got to take that into consideration, that that's only an amendment. That's not set in stone that the selecting committee is going to be the mayor and the three chairs of the committee. I think because, for full transparency, I'm going to be putting forth a competing amendment to that there is an independent body that selects these individuals. And I think we all know the process that ultimately the mayor by our city code is the only individual that has the authority to appoint the members to this body. So that's why the words nominate are being used, because ultimately at the end of the day, the mayor is the only person that has the authority to appoint. But to the point I was trying to make earlier is that we don't want to get stuck on the amendment that Mayor Weber's proposing, because that has not passed yet. That's not the guiding process. It's a proposed process. And there is going to be a different proposed process as well that I strongly feel the community wants.
Mr. Chair, on that point.
Councilwoman Vigil Coppola on that point.
Okay, if you read the language, it's clear that the persons are nominated, but if you read the language and follow it, at least 8 members of the committee shall. So the 8 members on this committee shall be the persons nominated by the governing body.
Okay, so, and it certainly doesn't say that the governing body, any given member, can't nominate 6 people. I'm just trying to clarify that if I put someone's name forward, I can't have the expectation that that person is absolutely going to be appointed to this committee. And I don't know that I think that it's a good idea that they should be. I'm not clear if I think that is a good idea. I'm just talking some of this through here in committee. So that has to do with that amendment. Going back to the amendment that has 10 parts to it. So part number 5, are the makers of this amendment withdrawing that? Or deleting it?
Counselor, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Councilwoman Vio Coppler.
Number 5 is presented as a separate amendment.
So I read that and I saw it. So I'm trying to determine, is 5 being deleted out of this list?
Out of this list it is, but it is on a separate amendment.
And it's different on the separate amendment.
I don't recall.
Yes, it goes from a presentation on a monthly basis to bi-monthly.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to clean this up a little bit. That seemingly number 5 on that amendment list should be deleted. Yes?
From the amendment sheet that I'm looking at, it is stricken out.
Okay. It's not on the one that I'm looking at, but it's very hard for us to know which ones because the way our packet lists all of those, it's not very clear which one is which. The next one I want to talk about for just a moment is number 6, where it talks about the size of this committee. And friends, what difference does it make if it's 21 or 19? I mean, it's an unwieldy committee, whether it's 19 or 21. So I think that we're getting pretty far in the swamp to say, you know, no, it's going to be 21. No, it's going to be 19. I don't know what the difference is, but apparently you guys had something in mind with that, but it's a hard one for me to follow because it's going to be an unwieldy committee, whether it's 17, 19, or 21. So I just ask that you folks would discuss that amongst yourselves and get clarity on what it is you really think works for that.
Councilwoman, can I just check in with Jesse real quick? He had his hand up. So.
Sure.
Jesse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and councilors. Councilor Lindell, just to maybe make it a little easier, so I think maybe you're looking at the previous amendment from Councilors Rivera, Garcia, and Vihil Coppler, which is in the packet. It's the 5th attachment. If you look at the 6th attachment, that's an amended amendment, and that shows the language as they wanted it to show now. So it strikes number 3 and number 5, which are then put into subsequent amendments separately. and then it makes a little some language changes to number 7. And just as a note on the change from 21 to 19, that was done based on their deleting of or their removal of a couple of members from the committee. So it's just a math amendment essentially to make sure that the number of appointed members equals what's listed above.
Okay, so while you're on, Jesse, is there any reason for us to have all of these listed in the packet if the amendment has been amended? Can we get rid of the original one so that we're all trying to look at the same one?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilor, yes, we can. I was waiting until Aaron had a chance to sign the new amendments, which I just sent them to her earlier today. So that was the only reason I didn't delete the original.
Thank you. So now I'm looking at the new one. Okay, so now I'm looking at the new one and I'm looking at number 9, where that refers to former elected officials. And that's one that I have pretty strong feelings on, that I think that, I don't know who those people would be. I have no idea who would be willing to serve on this, but I think that having 2 former elected officials, I think they could bring a lot to this committee. And that's one line item on here that I do disagree with on this amendment sheet. So, and number, it's hard for me to know now that I'm on a new sheet. Number 11, which is on page 4, line 22, strike 3 and insert 4. I get, okay, that has to do with the at-large committee members. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a good idea. So number 8 is one. Number 3's been taken out. Number 5's been taken out. I really question number 6, but I don't need to trip over it. But number 8 is one that I feel pretty strongly that it would be helpful to this committee of this many people to have a couple of formerly elected officials on it. The other one that is kind of a tripping point for me from these amendment sheets is selection by members, each member of the governing body selecting someone. So those are my comments, Chair. Thank you all for doing the work on this that you have. And I think that if we could possibly continue to work on these amendments prior to getting to council, it would be very, very helpful to all of us come time to really vote on this at council. Thank you,
It'd be
Chair.
nice to consolidate and get everything in one sheet, or at least, 2 sheets maybe, but let's see how the rest of this discussion goes. I did forget about the mayor's amendment, and I know I believe the mayor's on, so I don't know if the mayor wants to take a minute to speak to his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I know that Councilor Garcia has said he has an alternative methodology, and I'm open to suggestions, of course. I was attempting here to make sure that there was a reasonable way for people who are on the governing body to participate, just as Councilor Rivera, you and or Chairman Rivera, you and Councilwoman Villarreal participated in the vetting of folks who had nominated themselves to be on the community safety, health and safety task force. And it struck me that one method that would cut across all of our committees would be simply to ask the chairs to take on that responsibility. So that's the amendment. If people have a better way to go, I'm interested in the ideas of this committee and the others that this resolution will work its way through as it makes its way to the governing body. But it struck me as a way to cut across the committees and make sure that all of the debate that went on at the committee level got reflected in the process of vetting the candidates. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, so we have a resolution and a number of amendments. I don't know if we want to take a stab at trying to approve anything yet. I think, like I said, I think we're all pretty close. I know Councilor Garcia has some recommendations with regards to the mayor's amendment, but I think we're close and we have signed on most of this committee with the exception of Councilor Lindell on all the amendments that have come forward. So I'm hoping we can start to narrow this down and move it forward with some strong recommendations and amendments.
Mr. Chair?
Councilwoman Vihel Coppler.
Before we get to that part, I would like some consensus about giving Jesse direction after signature from the city attorney's office to remove the first amendments of ours so that there's not confusion as raised by Councilor Lindell.
Jesse, I believe you said that, but can you just confirm?
Yes, Mr. Chair and councilors, I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so what are the wishes of the committee with regards to this resolution and the amendments?
Mr. Chair, I would move for approval of the resolution with the amendments as presented this evening, including the mayor's, only because we don't have Councilor Garcia's amendment yet.
All right, is there a second for that?
I'll second it for purposes of discussion.
All right, discussion.
I'm wondering,
Councilwoman Lindell.
thank you, I'm sorry to have spoken out of turn, Chair. I'm just wondering about if we wanted to vote on these, all three of them at once, if we want to vote on them separately. I realize that Councilor Beta made a motion with all three that have been discussed, which I'm able to make that vote. But it may be that, well, it's a motion and it has a second, so I guess we're going to have a vote on it.
Yeah, I would ask the maker of the motion and the second to consider on the larger amendment, the one that has the 11 items in it, that we consider striking item 2 and item 6 out of it. Item 2 had to do with the mediator, I believe, and the dispute resolution, which I think Councilor Beta addressed in his amendment. And then to strike item 6, which dealt with a number of people on the committee from 21 to 19.
Mr. Chairman, that was my intent.
Okay.
That's what I thought I was doing in my motion. Thank you.
And then in line 9, I'm not, you know, as one of the sponsors of this, and we can have a little discussion on it, I'm not married to the idea of having only one representative from previous government, city government. If Councilwoman Lindell feels strongly about having two, I'm okay with that. And like we discussed earlier, I'm not sure what the difference is between 17 and 21 or 25 members. So if she feels strongly about that, I'm okay with deleting 9. I don't know what the other co-sponsors feel about that. Councilwoman Vihel Coppler.
Mr. Chair, I don't have a lot of heartache about leaving 2 elected officials. The reasoning behind our discussion was to, we felt like a elected official prior would have just as much to say about whatever input they had to the committee's purpose and achieving objectives. They'd have a council perspective if they were a counselor, and or at least an elected official perspective. And our intent, as I recall, was that we felt like we needed to address the size of the committee. And we also felt like it was more important to have a member at large than it was to have an elected official on this committee. Our interest was in knowing what the public had to say. There's been many opinions about this, and to add another member at large, I thought would be more valuable than to have the committee to be overly large, and that we would get a perspective from an elected official, which is what we wanted. So I didn't believe we were losing anything, but we were gaining more by having an at-large member. The other, I agree. I think we should strike the number of positions on the committee completely because it's irrelevant. Once we choose the subject matters that we want and the number of people in those subject matters, then the number on the committee is irrelevant. But I wanted to speak, if I may, right now about the motion itself. And I would feel more comfortable moving without a recommendation, the mayor's amendment, than to include it for approval here, because I'm interested in other ideas of how you select this committee. I would like to hear that first. And so that would just be my preference, but I know we have a motion on the floor. Thank you.
Councilor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would be opposed to striking number 9. As Councilor Vihel Coppler said, I strongly believe we need to have as many at-large positions in regards to this, because there are going to be lots and lots of interest for participation. And just because we strike that doesn't mean that a former elected official can't take one of those at-large positions. As I mentioned, I think the intent behind having the elected officials on this committee was to help guide the committee through the political process. And if you have one person, that's sufficient. I don't think having 2 is if I had the choice to take an average Joe community member who was deeply impacted by these events that are currently impacting our city over an elected official, I'm going to choose the community member, because their input is extremely critical and valuable. And right now their voice is feeling like it's not being heard. And we need to ensure that their voice is heard. And if we just stack this up with elected officials and folks with high-level degrees, the community is not going to buy into this. They're not going to feel like they're welcomed. And we need to ensure that we have enough at-large seats. And that's why I put forth the recommendation we lower the number of electeds to at-large seats.
All right.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
And I agree with Councilor Vihel Coppler. I would, because as the motion stands, I won't support it solely because I don't support the mayor's amendment. I support the rest of the amendments being pushed forth, but I would not support the motion as proposed. So I don't know if we can pull that, but as it stands, I would not be able to support it.
All right, so let's finish up with this sheet first. So what I heard is that we're okay deleting number 2 and number 6, but we would like to leave item 9 in there. Was that okay with the maker of the motion and the second?
Yes, it is.
All right, and then what about the mayor's amendment? Counselor, do you want to pass that through without a resolution or vote on it as you made the motion?
To set the example for what we hope this committee does, I will be willing to move that off to the side right now. And that's something that we can discuss in other committees or at the city council. So I'm willing to withdraw it so that potentially we could have a unanimous decision out of this committee when it comes to this resolution.
Is that okay with the second? Who was the
No.
second?
I'm the second.
Okay, you want to leave it in there, Councilwoman?
I do.
Okay. Jesse, you have a comment or a
Thank you,
suggestion?
Mr. Chair, councilors. Just on number 6 about deleting the members. Right now, page 3, line 21 says regarding membership, it says chart committee membership shall include 21 members. If we leave it at 21, it just won't add up if we're adopting the other amendments, because there will really be 19 members on there. So this, the numbers may change based on what amendments are adopted at the eventually at the governing body. But my suggestion for now is just to keep it, and we can discuss it at the governing body to see if it is going to be 19, it's going to be 21, it's going to be whatever. But I would just suggest maybe keeping it for the time being.
Is that okay with the maker of the motion?
Yes.
The second?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a motion that remains with the mayor's amendment, as well as the other amendments that were recommended by myself, Councilor Garcia, Councilwoman Viejo Coppler, and then other amendment sheets by Councilor Beta, which we have also signed on to. Any further discussion on these? Councilwoman Lindell.
Just because we pass this doesn't mean that it's not going to get amended or something's going to happen to it in the future. So, I mean, this sets absolutely nothing in stone. It's at this moment in time for this vote, but I really suspect a fair amount of this will change, but we have a motion and a second, so I'm ready to vote, Chair.
All right, Councilor Garcia on discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in regards to the comments my colleague just made, I understand the perspective, but if I were to vote in favor of this, that would basically be me saying I support the mayor's amendment, which I absolutely do not. And to echo the comments I had in our quality of life committee meeting, we have to understand the issue at hand and the history we're addressing and the demographics of those cultures that are going to need to be addressed. And with that proposed amendment, there is not a single Native American or indigenous person on that selection committee. And the way I would like for us to approach this is that we be as open and transparent as possible in a manner where there is no room for the community to say they got selected because of this, they didn't select me because of this. And without any indigenous representation, there's going to be too much room for folks, and in particular indigenous brothers and sisters, to say, you don't know me, you don't know my culture, why should you select me or select that person? And I think it's critical and necessary for us to have those demographics as part of the selection committee. And I understand that at the end of the day, per city code, it's the mayor who ultimately appoints these individuals. But I would like the whatever body it is that makes the appointments or the recommendations be a demographics that thoroughly represents the entire community and histories we're trying to address right now. And so with that, that's why I cannot support this motion, because that to me would be saying I'm okay with leaving an indigenous person out.
Yeah, so just a couple of things there, Councilor Garcia. So the first, I think no one's opposed to what you're saying. We just want to see something that replaces what the mayor has proposed, and we don't have that in front of us now. The other thing is, if you vote on something now in committee, there's nothing that says that you can't vote against it at governing body. That's happened many times. It doesn't commit you to something. Things change all the time, and you may like a resolution that comes through committee that changes over time, and then at council you decide you don't like it. So keep that in mind as well. Councilwoman Vihel-Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My reasoning, what I said earlier, is that I would prefer that we move forward Mayor Weber's amendment without a recommendation, is because I think it provides some kind of adequate reflection of what we are discussing today, in that it provides the meeting minutes with what's important for our history. And I know, for example, when I see other committees votes, I do look through those sheets to see who voted what and was it removed from consent. Very often there will be discussion or there will be move forward without recommendation. And I always then ask, what was the discussion about? Because I want to know, particulars. Otherwise, there's no person in the future who sees our minutes and our tally sheet that even has any idea that we went through this discussion we went through now. And that's one reason why I think it's important. And granted, we can vote now, but it does have an implication that we agreed with all the amendments. That is what the vote is. And it sounds rather fickle that of us, if we change our vote later on, it is a little bit like, oh, well, you might be a flip-flopper or whatever they can call you for not maybe being up to speed on something. There's all kinds of interpretations that can be made. And I'm kind of one for having a good record to reflect the actions that committee and discussions, as much as they're even recorded, of what committee action there is. And nowadays we don't have verbatim type minutes. So it's even more important, I think, that we adhere to protecting our vote to what it is we intended to vote on. To say that in the future, oh, you can always change your vote. I agree, but it is rather sloppy. And I, am not really into that too much. So, I'm going to have to be forced to vote against this for the same reason. But it's different. I would be happy to vote the amendment forward without a recommendation, but I don't want to vote that I approve of it wholeheartedly. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Vihel-Coppler. So we do have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? We have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Priscilla.
Chairman Christopher Rivera,
Yes.
Councillor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Councillor Joanne Vihel-Coppler,
No.
Councillor Michael Garcia,
No.
and the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Priscilla. And again, Councilor Garcia, as soon as you can get any changes or ideas in front of us, I think the sooner the better. So I know it's a large task to be taken on. but this is important. I think we all agree with you. But in light of not having anything in front of us, there has to be a method for us to choose who's going to be on this committee. So I look forward to your changes. All right, so motion passes. We're on item G, an ordinance amending section 14-8 SFCC 1987 to add a reference to that impact fee service area. This was pulled by Councilwoman Vihel Coppler, and I believe Carlos is on to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just have, I have two questions. One, I'm curious as to whether the fees, as they're described in these charts, you know, so much for fire, police, roads, streets, parks. When these fees are collected, do they go into the accounts of these departments?
They do, Counselor. And so the Finance Department maintains 4 separate fees for each of those purposes, and those are held specifically for impact fees. And I also do have a short presentation. I do want to make sure that we're respectful of your time and that, you know, we're not going too long. But if you want me to get into more details, we can. Otherwise, I'll just respond to some questions.
Okay.
But
So
that.
Hold on, sorry, Carlos.
Please. Oh, excuse me.
Hold on, I did tell Carlos that I would allow him a few minutes to make a quick presentation on this, which I forgot about. So if you want to take a few minutes to give us an idea of everything that's going on with this, go ahead, Carlos.
Mr. Chair, I have one more question I might want to ask in case he can address it in his presentation.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is on the FIR, the question that says, what will happen if we don't do this? And it makes reference to the city maybe having to refund money. And I would say, why would we have to refund money? And what have we been doing since then with the money? I mean, I don't understand that part of the FIR. So I'm not sure, I guess, why we would have to refund money. And if so, why aren't we refunding money now? Because we haven't approved this.
Counselor, could you point out where in the FIR it talks about refunding money? Oh, I've got it right. Great question. So the IFCIP is what's required by the state in order to collect and use impact fees. And so if we don't have an eligible or valid plan to actually be using impact fees, then those funds are just sitting in there. And so the IFCIP is required by the state for us to actually be using those funds. Does that make that a little more clear?
So are you saying that that we have to spend these monies, we have to approve this impact fee schedule and spend these monies in these categories, or we essentially forfeit them?
To some degree. And so, so the state law, the Development Fees Act, provides a very limited way that the city can collect impact fees. And so the 4 funds that we're collecting impact fees on can only be used for those types of purposes. If the city cannot use them for those types of purposes, the city would be required to refund those. That's not what we're directly talking about right now. But we would need a plan in order to continue collecting and using these fees.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just make one quick before Carlos goes into his presentation, Councilor Vihel Coppler, you asked if the funds go into the department's budgets. Just a quick point of clarification. They do not go into the department budgets. They go into dedicated funds in all 4 areas. which are then available to various departments doing projects that satisfy the eligibility requirements of those types of, to use those types of funds. So, you know, parks and public works and land use could theoretically use funds in the parks impact fee fund, or public works and parks could use money in the roads impact fees funds if they were, say, putting in a road in, say, Swan Park or another large regional park. So it's a little, you know, they're available to multiple departments, and they are not part of their budgets per se. They are specifically for funding projects that respond to the impacts of growth in these different subject areas.
Well, I guess that the reason I asked the question, then I'm sorry, but is because, for example, let's say, you know, we've been wanting to build a South Meadows fire station, and this money, you know, I don't know if it's a purposeful use of it, but if it is, or some other type, and it's slowly building up, and then all of a sudden here comes Roads and Streets and says, oh, there's money there. Let's take it and let's do this with it instead. So then the fire station never becomes a reality. That's why I was asking, because, you know, it's a little bit too free without setting priorities and maybe kind of earmarking this money for these various projects.
I think that's a great point. And I think Carlos's presentation will talk about how the process of getting sort of projects identified first through the impact fees, capital improvements program and list, and how those projects then can move on to the CIP list for the city and become funded and completed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. So before I start, I do want to, caution the committee that the subject can get very technical. We're going to try to keep this detailed and focused. The proposal we have is intended to be a focused update to the impact fees that we currently charge. In concept, impact fees are used by local governments to charge development a proportionate share of the infrastructure costs they impose. And so we could summarize that as saying growth towards growth. So impact fees can't be used for maintenance. They have to be used for growing infrastructure. Santa Fe right now is charging 4 different types of impact fees. Those impact fees are not restricted to the roads department or to the parks or the fire department. They're restricted to roads, parks, fire, and police types of infrastructure. Past funds have been used for a lot of different purposes. I can discuss those a little bit. A lot of forthcoming projects. Parks has about $1.5 million that they are proposing to be using in the next 6 months or so. And all of the impact fee process is governed by the Citizen Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, which is a citizen oversight committee, which includes members appointed from each of the counselors. That includes people like Kim Shanahan, Jack Hyatt, Isaac Pino, and some other developers, lawyers, and finance professionals. And so the process that we move through, everything is going first through that citizen advisory committee before it comes to the governing body. The context is that our current plan, which was adopted in 2014, ends in 2020. And so state law requires that we have a valid plan. And so we are trying to get a valid plan before the end of 2020. The goals that we really had for this process, and this is how we were trying to really focus and expedite this process, is make sure that we are we're achieving legal compliance with state and local laws, avoid any drastic changes at the moment, but then also try to consider the naturally increasing or escalating infrastructure costs that we're experiencing over time. 2 different parts of this proposal. The first is a resolution adopting the IFCIP. And so again, that's a plan. One of the main things that plan lays out is it's a calculation around the maximum calculated fees, and then an ordinance that actually assesses fees at a particular percentage of the maximum. I will say that the mayor has sponsored the legislation so far. The CIAC has worked closely with staff to review and recommend both of these parts. And the Planning Commission just last week recommended approval for the ordinance. The IFCIP, the main thing to think about it right now is that it's a calculation of the maximum calculated fees. And so again, we get this large calculation. It's required by state law, and we use an experienced professional contractor to work with us on all those calculations. A second main aspect of the IFCIP is it does include these eligible projects. Now, exactly to Councilor Vigil-Kopler's point, the eligible projects that are in that plan are not prioritized. They are not set on a particular timeline. They are not established for feasibility. That is a separate process. And so the IFCIP merely tries to lay out what different types of potentially eligible projects the city may potentially prioritize with impact fees at the current moment. These tables can change fairly easily, but it's really the CIP, it is counselors, it is internal processes, and it's the departments themselves that are trying to prioritize and evaluate how these projects work. Again, we can absolutely think about how we could change the IFCIP to prioritize or to do different things. But for our purposes, because we're trying to expedite this process before December, we're really keeping that narrow and limited to just updating what we have. That's the IFCIP. The proposed ordinance that we've drafted, it attempts to first assess impact fees that are relatively similar to 2014. So the main idea here is to not change things too drastically right now, to not create too many ripples, to not rock the boat, to not surprise existing development. That's really the priority for maintaining fees where they're at. However, because current fees are only covering around 55% of the infrastructure costs, the calculated infrastructure costs, we've drafted and received recommendation from CIAC and the Planning Commission to have a phased increase of impact fees. And so that would increase impact fees around $300 to $600 annually for different types of residential units, also for types of commercial units. And that would provide predictable increases while also requiring that the CIAC review and recommend a plan or changes in 2023. So this would really be two of the phased increases before we were required to come back and reassess this. From tonight, because we're on a very tight schedule, staff is hoping that the committee can consider the resolution adopting IFCIP, that the committee can consider the bill amending the impact fees, and that we could get any questions or concerns so that we could try to resolve those before the December 9th governing body meeting. And that's all I have. So beyond that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Councilwoman Vigil-Kopler, you still have the floor.
Those were my questions, and I've gotten some answers. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? See none, what are the wishes?
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion for approval in a second. Any further discussion? See none, can we have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Priscilla?
Chairman Christopher Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Councilor Roman Abeyta,
Yes.
Councilor Joanne Vigil-Kopler,
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Now we're on to our last item, item J, which is consideration to adopt by ordinance a maximum of 1,000 short-term rental permits in the city. I won't read the whole thing, but that's what we're talking about, short-term rentals. So Councilwoman Vihel Coppler, you pull this one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I pulled this so that I could introduce the amendments to this committee that I've made. And I'm trying to pull them up right now. Well, the first one is amending well, it's not necessarily amending the short-term rental ordinance as much as it is creating a provision where beginning July 2021, that the city can identify and take either a percentage or number of gross receipts tax that's generated by the short-term rentals that are rented effective, of course, July 2021. Now, it's important to, and I'll restate this again, it's important to pay attention to our affordable housing program. And it's important to do something, start somewhere to fund the Affordable Housing Trust. And I know there were some questions raised in finance. In fact, this didn't even get a second. But the objections that were raised had to do with, number one, having several streams of income. And I agree with that. I agree that we should have, take every stream of income that we could possibly concoct. But the important thing is to fund affordable housing. And we have been talking about affordable housing since way before I even got on this city council. I've been involved in talking about affordable housing through the National Association of Realtors, the New Mexico Association of Realtors, the local Santa Fe Association of Realtors, and even through lobbying several times at the legislature for priorities. We can and should pay more attention and try to fund this affordable housing because we are very, very behind. I do understand that this particular short-term rental gross receipts tax has competing interest. But what we are doing here with some of these recommendations are we are attempting to make more strict and curtail short-term rentals when really the problem is enforcement of the law we already have on the books. And we've already admittedly heard from the Planning and Land Use Department that they don't have enough staff, and that, you know, they have maybe some plans to beef it up, maybe pay more attention to it. But I don't think we should be, you know, turning away the hand that feeds us. And in this regard, you know, we're talking about making a bit of a difference. In the report from HomeWise said between $1.5 and $2 million, which the short-term rentals generate, and that's just in the past. And trickling out, cutting through a bit portion of it to recognize housing to housing, that we are serious about affordable housing, that we can dedicate some of that money to the program. I know the mayor has an idea of funding it through cannabis. I don't think that's a bad idea, but that's not an idea here before us. That could be something in the future, but that's not the be all to end all. And we don't know politically where that would be going anyway. But we do have an opportunity here today to take a stand, to show that we are willing to do what's necessary to fund our affordable housing program. And I'm a big believer in dedicating funds to like programs. So short-term rental housing, to affordable housing, same as we do with lodger's tax. We collect it, it's earmarked to tourism and the like. I think the same way cannabis would be earmarked for addiction and recovery programs. And then who knows what else? Maybe it could be the Affordable Housing Trust, which would be wonderful. But we're very, very behind, and we are losing families that don't have housing, that don't have anywhere to go, and they're in fact leaving Santa Fe. And it's real easy to forget about them because we don't really have anything here that comes before us that talks about them. And I think it's about time that we have an opportunity here. It's about time we take a little action, not a piece of the pie, and it's about priorities. Now, some would say, well, we need to budget for them and such, and yes, we do. Hence the effective date of this to be July 2021. There's so many things we can do with affordable housing, then we're not doing much of anything. But it needs money, and it needs money to sustain all kinds of programs, to develop into something good, to finally address what we haven't been addressing for some time. And so I think this is an opportune time to, why I introduced this amendment. It may not be perfect, but it is saying, hey, this governing body, it finds maybe could carve out a short stream of gross receipts tax from this and allocate it into the Affordable Housing Trust. And that is why I made this amendment before you. That's the first one, Mr. Chair.
All right, any questions about the First Amendment proposed by Councilwoman Vihil Coppler? Councilor Abeyta.
A couple of questions. The first is for legal, and then the second is for Councilwoman Vihil Coppler. My question to legal is, the amendment proposes to amend another ordinance, a separate ordinance. And is that proper? Do we have to do, because when we published the title and general summary of this ordinance, we mentioned the different ordinances we were going to amend, or the one ordinance and the sections of it we're going to amend. And now we're amending another ordinance with this amendment without that kind of notice. So I haven't seen that done since I've been on the council. Maybe it is okay, but like I said, it's just we're amending a separate ordinance with an amendment to this ordinance.
Thank you, Chair Rivera. Councilor Abeyta. I think that it's a good question with regard to notice. I did speak to the city attorney about it this afternoon right before this meeting, and we are reviewing it to decide whether we need to put out a separate publication, adding that this could potentially affect GRT dedications towards affordable housing as part of this legislation. We are looking into it. The public hearing is not until December 9th, and I think under state law, we need to publish notice of a proposed ordinance amendment. I believe it's 2 weeks in advance. So we do have time. I understand that the city attorney and the city clerk will be reviewing that and figuring out whether to put out an additional publication.
Okay, and then thank you, Councilwoman Vihil Coppler. I understand the intent of the amendment. I do have a concern with dedicating a portion of gross receipts taxes. But so what I'm wondering is if maybe the amendment could read that under item 3 on page 10, line 17, that amendment, it says, beginning July 1st, 2021 is provided in section 1810.4 SFCC 1987, an amount equal to the portion of the gross receipts taxes generated from the rental of short-term rental units within the city of Santa Fe shall be deposited into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That way we're not actually tying up and saying this portion of GRT has to go to this. If there's funding from somewhere else or other sources, then we can take from there. So in other words, so the amount would be the same thing, but we wouldn't be tying ourselves down to where it comes from. But we would be tying ourselves to actually putting this in every year into our budget, into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Thank you for that. I was trying to flip through to as you were talking, and I'm wondering if you could just succinctly make your point about where you would change this.
Yeah, on the amendment sheet on item number 3, where it says on page 10, line 17, after the period, insert the following new sentence. And the sentence would read, beginning July 1st, 2021, as provided in section 18-10.4 SFCC 1987, then insert an amount equal to the portion. So that it's not, we're not tying up the GRT, but we are saying whatever that GRT generates, we need to put that amount in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And then we can choose, or the finance director can choose where it comes from, but it would equal that amount. And then that way we're not strictly dedicating that GRT to that. So I think that was the concern of the finance committee, was we're tying it into GRT specifically. So this gives us more flexibility, but I think it still accomplishes what you want, which is whatever that amount is generating, it's going into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund when we approve our budget every year.
Well, I think that is something that is, some money is better than no money. And, it didn't look like this was getting any steam by all accounts of groups that I've met with, and, the discussion at finance committee. So I think it's important to consider what you're suggesting. I also want to make the point that I originally did have this language in the the short-term rental ordinance, but on good recommendation by the city attorney's office, it was moved to this section. So, that goes to your earlier point. It was in it, but then it wasn't in it, which I agree. It's better in this section. So, I'm accepting of that, but I don't want it to end there. I think it's time to set affordable housing as a priority rather than just talk about it. I think it's time to move the money to where this program is more successful. The more days and budgets that move forward, the further behind we're getting. And, there are many groups out there, as you probably know, who are watching what we're doing and are frankly very disillusioned, as am I, about how this keeps getting the back burner, because many times these are constituents who don't follow what we're doing because they can't. Maybe they don't even have access to internet. And of course, now with Zoom, and even when we weren't online, it's real hard for a family who has to make ends meet to run down to City Hall and sit in a chair and not really understand when it is that they are supposed to talk, if they are getting to talk. So, as I mentioned, there are a lot of us in this community who want to finally see action. And in my mind, because this is a discussion we were having, this is a good point to bring it up. Funding, we need funding for that. I realize it strays from short-term rentals a bit, but I'm a big believer in programs to programs, and so I like that recommendation.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Councilwoman Lindell. You're on mute, Councilor.
Counselor, I appreciate very much that you have awoken this in everyone's mind. A couple of things that I have questions on, and probably one of the things that gives me the greatest pause is that trying to tack this on to the short-term rental ordinance. I think that this needs to be a much bigger discussion than a tacked on amendment to an ordinance that has been given a huge amount of time by a committee over the course of many months. And this issue itself probably deserves that same kind of timing and to figure it out. So I think it really is a separate issue, and it's not an issue to be tacked on to short-term rental. When we talk about putting it onto GRT, I mean, I always ask, so what is it that we're willing to cut that we have now? Because it's not new revenue, it's not a new revenue stream. And what it would mean is that we have to cut some programs that we currently have. Maybe that's what we'd like to do. The next question is, how much money are we talking about? I mean, I haven't been given any. I got an email from a group that talked about it being millions of dollars. I personally don't really think that that's the case, but I need to know how much we're talking about and how we're going to determine that. Because otherwise I don't really know what I would be supporting. But what I really think is that this is a separate issue, and it well deserves to be brought as a separate issue. You said that the mayor talked about cannabis. There's a lot of different sources for new revenue that could fund this and that could fund it adequately. I don't think that, and once again, I don't even know how much money we're talking about. Some people say as little money as a couple of $100,000 from this stream of revenue. I have no idea. Another group says several million. There's some zeros and commas in between there that we need to account for. But I would also need to know, if we're doing this as GRT, what are the areas that we would be, to use a nicer term than cutting, that we would be reallocating from. So at this point, I'm glad that, and I appreciate that this has become a topic and something to talk about. I think it deserves its own amount. I think it deserves to be its own subject. And I would be more than willing to work on it as its own subject. I don't think just tacking it on to a short-term rental ordinance gives it the time and the consideration that it really deserves. So that's what I have on it. And again, thank you, Counselor.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Yes, Councilwoman Vihil-Coppler.
The report that I have been told, it shows the income between 1.5 and 2 million. And, that of course was from 2018. So it appears that it could be even greater now. But I like the suggestion by Councilor Abeyta. And I think this dialogue needs to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it needs to come to the forefront. And I will say that thank you, Councilor Lindell, for agreeing that it's an important subject that you are very interested in, and I want to work with you as well. And I will be bringing forth more measures to bring this to a forefront. It's really time. It's time to do this. And so with this item, I guess, Mr. Chair, I'll rest in peace.
All right, Ms. Paez, you had your hand up initially and then put it down. I want to make sure you didn't have something important to share with us.
Chair Rivera, I don't need to interfere right now in the councilors' kind of debate of this issue. We can certainly look at the exact language. I think what I wanted to kind of point out is just in our existing GRT ordinance, there are certain percentages of the GRT. Our municipal portion of the GRT is allocated by 0.25%, and some of that is already to specific purposes. So the part we can play with, in my understanding, is the part that would normally go into our general fund. And so I think that's kind of why we've had to try to wordsmith this in a way. So if we're going to adjust the language, we just need to kind of keep an eye on that and to make bigger revisions would require more, I think, research into what portions does the governing body have the ability to change? Are certain things actually set by state law in terms of like paying off our bonds and things? I think some of that we do have some other obligations. So I'm not a tax attorney. It's a complicated area. So doing this right, I just want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on these kinds of changes to make sure that we're tracking the law. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions from the committee? I have a question, Mr. Isaacson. Do we know how much, are we anticipating how much income we'll receive from this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Right now, that was something that came up at last Monday's Finance Committee meeting. And I believe staff from the Finance Department said that they would look into this and have a better idea of what the actual numbers are in time for the November 30th regularly scheduled Finance Committee meeting. I have not spoken with Director McCoy or Brad Flitch since that meeting, so I'm not sure if they've been able to track that information down yet or not, but I know they're actively trying to figure out what the amount is. And then to Assistant City Attorney Paez's point, after we figure out what the sort of gross number is, then we'll have to do some calculations to figure out what the net amount is based off of what can actually be allocated from that lump sum towards GRT and then to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
And what are you currently using short-term rental revenues for?
So I believe that the short-term rental revenues are going towards the general fund at this time. There is some language in the revision that is in front of us this evening, and eventually we'll go to the governing body. Actually, I take that back. Excuse me. Let me rewind. There was some language in the civil penalties ordinance that was passed earlier this year that stipulated that the money generated by issuing civil penalties for land use violations would go towards supporting first the short-term rental office and then the land use department more broadly. So that's where some of that money will go. But in terms of the lodger's tax and GRT that is generated by short-term rentals, it's my understanding that money will continue to go to the general fund.
All right, and ultimately the general fund is what supports your entire division, right? As well as many other divisions within the city, but you get primarily most of your funding from general fund.
That is correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are, with the exception of the MPO, the land use department is almost entirely funded by the general fund. That is correct.
All right, and Councilor Beta, I don't know if you received any information on the updated GRTs. I know they're due shortly. I'm sure they're not positive, so just curious though if you know how far behind we are, if you've been updated on that yet.
We've been, Mr. Chairman, we've been getting updated. Our GRT reports have been looking better than what was budgeted, but still at a deficit. And one thing that I am working with Ms. McCoy on is how much an amendment like this would cost a year. And I actually don't think it's a large amount of money, but I want to confirm that with Ms. McCoy. I don't think we're talking $1 million or more than $1 million, even in good years, because it's when you break down the different increments and you keep breaking it down, I don't think we're talking about $1 million or more, but I could be wrong. That's something that Ms. McCoy is researching, as Director Isaacson said.
So these are still things that Finance Department and your committee are looking into, and will make a decision on at some point?
Yes, well, not only on this, but the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in general, and how, because I agree with Councilwoman Vihel-Coppler. I think we do need to figure out how to start funding it and putting money towards that. And I think the rest of the Finance Committee feels the same way, and that's why they've asked for this information and these studies as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilwoman Vihel-Coppler, I know you and Councilor Garcia both have sponsored an amendment that has the same language to delete. Let me find it here. On page 7, strike line 17 and 18. You're both proposing that. You want to speak briefly to that?
Well, I have a whole other sheet of amendments as well, so I can jump to that.
We'll look at that one and then we'll go to the other sheet.
Okay, well, I think I'd like Councilor Garcia to I'm actually co-sponsoring that with him.
Okay, it's okay. Councilor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that amendment was brought forth, per the recommendation, not only of the Planning Commission, but I think there's community support for that in the sense that the challenges we've seen with our short-term rentals have been number of rentals, not necessarily the days of rentals being rented out. And I think that was obvious to the Planning Commission as well. So that's why they've put forth the recommendation that we eliminate this. On top of that, we do not have the capability to enforce this. So it's necessary for us to have a penalty or a limitation in the ordinance that we can't even enforce, nor do we have a plan to enforce. So that's why this is being put forth.
Chair,
thank you.
I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing what amendment is sponsored by Councilor Vigil-Koppler and Councilor Garcia. Could you direct me to that, please?
I found it on 2 separate sheets, but they're the same deletion of the language. I can't see where they're together.
I can't see in my list anything that says Vigil-Koppler and Garcia together. I don't know which one that is.
Jesse, do we have one that has them both together?
Mr. Chair, councilors, not together. The version that I have, apologize, let me get to it, is from Councilor Garcia that strikes that language on page 7, lines 17 and 18. It is the 4th attachment on your list, Councilor Garcia's amendment.
I see it, but I don't see Councilor Vigil-Koppler is a signatory on it.
I'm not sure if we have one page with both of them signing on it. Councilwoman Lindell, I think they've both just submitted similar requests, similar amendments.
Once again, we have so many amendments with these things that if we don't keep them clear, it turns into a kind of a sizable mess. And these need to be cleaned up and clarified by the time we get to council.
I agree. Councilwoman Vigil-Koppler, do you want to discuss your other amendment sheet?
Sure. Before we move to that, I will say that, I agree with Councilor Garcia on the striking the 7-day. It creates a real hardship for some of the people that, well, you've heard, you've all gotten emails and phone calls. It's impossible to enforce. And secondly, it's really not the way real life is. Think of the times that you travel, even if you stay in a hotel. This is kind of similar to that. You go in, you're going to go in for the weekend, and then you're going to take off maybe even to somewhere else next on your journey. That analogy places the owner of a short-term rental in a real problem where, okay, just because you stayed there hopping because you're going somewhere else after this, they can't rent their rental until the 7 days is expired. I see no rationale for this. I just can't imagine why we want to micromanage so much at that level. And I'll go to my point earlier, and that is, short-term rentals are a good source of income for us. And we can't forget that, whether we spend it on affordable housing trust or not. We're hurting right now. we did get the August report, the report from August gross receipts, and it shows that we're 13%, 13 point something percent down from August of last year. So we, I said this way earlier, we can't turn away the hand that feeds us. And so I think the more we can continue to support the people who make us money, I think that's important to be said. Okay, so I'll go to my next amendment sheet, which you should find. I think it's the second one with my name on it. If you go to page 7, line 5, I'm suggesting that after corporation, we insert "and such entity, whether a revocable trust, an LLC, or a corporation, shall be responsible for any criminal or civil violation and fines." And that is because the natural person whose name might not even necessarily be individually on this shouldn't be additionally required to pay fines when the actual rental is in the corporation's name. It's not trying to get out of paying any fines. It's just not assessing a natural person. I think it's just fixing a little bit of a glitch there. The next one, page 2. I'm suggesting that on page 7, line 20, that the 50-foot apply to the front half. So on line 20, after "if," insert the front half of the subject property and yada, yada, yada. We have a problem here and we're going to create a real unfair issue with this. It went from, when it was 75 feet, it wasn't good, but we changed it to 50 feet, but it's from the boundary. So, if your property stretches way out there, that's your whole front yard and several feet that count against you. Now, if your catty corner or your backyard is less than or more than 50 feet, or less than 50 feet, I should say, it's just gonna create an unfair advantage, especially since we are grandfathering short-term rentals in. Some people would never have an opportunity to create a short-term rental, because when these pass, guarantee you nobody's going to give up their permit whether they're using it or not. And that's really going to tie things up. And I guess I should say here that, again, that we have the capability to enforce our rules, or we should put priority on the capability to enforce short-term rental rules. Because we're not doing that, we are imposing more strict restrictions on people that haven't broken the rules. And again, we're cutting off some income that we should take note of. Now, we have limited the short-term permits to 1,000. If you're going to grandfather in over 800 and some permits, you realize that. So all we're talking about is 125, maybe 150 permits. I'm not sure exactly what's left over permits to give to make that 1,000, and that's it. And I think the market and close enforcement by the planning and land use enforcement staff should take care of the people who are delinquent at following the rules. And I think this would all hash itself out. And I, it's like, when you have kids at the table and one kid misbehaves, then nobody gets dessert. Well, that's just not fair. You got to attack the problem at its root. And I think we should do that. We should pay more attention to enforcement. But since we have this before us, it's like amending it. I'm amending it to try to make it a little more palpable. And so, usually people pay attention to what's going on their street. They're not paying attention to what's going on behind them or, further around the corner, because some of these houses are somewhat close together. So I think that we should focus, if we're going to keep the 50-foot rule, that it should be on the front half rather than a radius. Now, I understand in the Quality of Life Committee, somebody said there was a report that had these rentals pinpointed, and I want to ask Eli if that report is available.
Mr. Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilor Vihel-Coppler. So first, it wasn't a report per se, but what we did is we used the GIS we have for showing the properties where currently short-term rental permits are listed. And we did this quick study by looking at the radius or the buffer around the properties at various increments, starting first at 25 feet and then going up in 25-foot increments all the way up to 100 feet. And as working with the sponsoring committee, we looked at the various neighborhoods in the city and saw where was sort of the sweet spot in terms of the offset distance that achieved the goals of trying to prevent too many of these short-term rentals from being too close to one another. And I bring that up also because as you were describing the condition earlier in your statement, it's not an offset from the house itself or from the structure itself. It's actually an offset from the property line. And so it doesn't matter where the unit is positioned on the property, the offset will remain the same, and that it will be from that property line. Now, the question about whether or not that should be restricted to the front half of the property and the just looking at the offset forward. I think there's two things that brings to mind. First, in our conversations with the sponsors as we were drafting the original legislation, that question came up, and I think those involved in the conversation properly identified that it doesn't really matter if a short-term rental is in front of you or to the side of you or behind you. They're all can be sort of disruptive in their own way. And so the fact that this 50-foot offset cancels out or restricts permits from being issued to properties in the rear was actually something, not so much a bug, but a feature of this provision in the code. And I would also say that trying to restrict it to only applying to the front half would put us in a territory, once again, that this provision is trying to take us out of, which is to make it very clear to understand which properties are eligible and which properties are not eligible. And so oftentimes, as we know, on the east side and some of our other neighborhoods, it's not always exactly clear what constitutes the quote unquote front of a property. And so we would then be subjecting ourselves again to having staff make interpretations which would potentially make it difficult for us to be consistent in our application of this. In terms of enforcement of this provision, it's actually quite simple. It's an analysis that would be done at the time of issuing permits, and it'd be one that we could easily enforce because we can use the GIS information to quickly determine if a property where an application has been received based off existing short-term rentals, is it within the buffer ring of an existing permit or not? And based off that determination, we would know whether or not to issue a permit on this application or not. So this is one that we've actually, I think, made some important strides in improving our enforcement by removing a lot of the gray area that's challenged us in the past.
Well, I still think that it's a little bit punitive for 125 permits left. It's really, I think it's damaging the people's property rights to do what others in their own neighborhood are doing. I can see some of these other changes being made that will facilitate more even application of the ordinance, but we're not enforcing anything. And we haven't been enforcing too much of this ordinance as it is for all kinds of reasons, not that you don't want to, but I think it's a little bit overreaching, and that's the reason why I think it's important to allow responsible property owners to continue to be able to apply for permits and get the same reasonable treatment as other people have had in the city. Next item is number 3 on page 8, line 5. After the word number, strike the rest of the sentence. And then later on, I'll just continue with page 8. I recommend striking at line 12, striking all of item A, and then the next amendment, strike B as well. So what this does is this in these multifamily units, this really creates unfairness within a group. Now, some of the multifamily dwelling units don't allow short-term rentals. Many of them don't. When you do this, it's going to really create some unfairness because you are grandfathering in. So for example, a building A might have the majority of the permits, and building B in the same complex doesn't get to do anything. How do you reconcile that in a neighborhood where this happens? Now, I mean, this could affect I think it's is it Corazon downtown on Catron Street? Could affect Artist Road, Fort Marcy condos up there. I'm not sure, but nevertheless, as it's written now, it's not fair because you could have big disparities in how you treat the people who own those. The grandfathered people are going to have the majority of these 12 permits, and then the rest are going to have nothing, or maybe they'll have 6, and you might have 6 to disperse among 3 other buildings. I'm not really sure why we can't take a softer approach to this, and that's why I'm just saying, delete them all.
Were you done, Councilwoman? Mr. Isaacson has his hand up again.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Mr. Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are great questions, Councilor. So where we came up with the cap of 12 has to do with a couple different things. One is our land use code definitions. So if you go to chapter 14, section 12, where our definitions are, we define a motel or a hotel as anything with more than 12 rental units for short-term occupancy. And so we felt in working with the sponsors that any building with more than 12 units that wanted to operate for short-term rentals should just go ahead and operate as a hotel or as a motel, and therefore would have to provide the amenities of a motel or a hotel and have the proper fire and life safety provisions and pass inspections as that type of use. So that was sort of the thinking there, and so the idea being, 25%. So if you have 4 units, one of them can be a short-term rental. If you had 8, then you could go up to 2 and escalate. And so if you did have a building that had, I guess it would be, math isn't my strong suit, but if you had 48 units and you wanted to use 25% of them as short-term rentals, you could. However, as soon as you exceed, the 48 units, you wouldn't be able to add additional short-term rental units beyond that. And so that was sort of how we arrived at that. That provision is through thinking through both of our sort of building codes and land use codes and our definitions, and figuring that beyond 12 should operate as a hotel. The question, so that, I believe that answers that question as in terms of why we are sort of restricting things in that way.
But how would you answer the fairness issue?
Fairness in what sense?
Well, where one, the same complex, different buildings, and all of them are concentrated because of grandfathering versus nobody gets to do it in the other buildings.
Well, so it's 12 per building. And so if you had a compound, like many of our multifamily condo compounds, you mentioned Fort Marcy, that's a little bit of an outlier because that's a resort residential community. But if we wanted to just use, say, El Matador condos as a example, even though they don't allow short-term rentals there, but they're a good example because I think most of us are familiar with them. They have multiple buildings. I think they have 5 or 6 different buildings on the site. And so they would be allowed to have up to 12 in each building as long as they don't exceed the 25% overall capacity. And so it's used both of those numbers to sort of level into what is a sort of reasonable amount of short-term rental units distributed across the site. But if they had, say, 100 units and they would be entitled to 25 overall short-term rental units in their compound, we would allow that. However, we would only allow it such that 12 be in any one building at any one time.
Well, it just goes back to just a lot of punitive, I consider to be punitive measures against property owners. When we're only really talking about 125 available permits, or maybe cut, plus or minus. And yet the city hasn't really done our job of enforcement in a very good way. I mean, I know we've had some enforcement, but.
So I would, I appreciate that. And I think what is an important sort of distinction to make is on some of these issues is, the difference between enforcement and prevention. And so in the area of, where should permits be issued, and trying to prevent too many short-term rental units being issued in any one area, I think we've been pretty good at that. And this provision, the 25 feet or the 25% up to 12, these types of things are things we can prevent from happening because they're reviewed and analyzed at the time of application. Some of the enforcement challenges that we have are more about the operation of these units after the permits have been issued and some of the ongoing challenges there. I think that, we've also been talking about the notion of enforcement around the 1 stay per 7 day provision. And again, I think that that's an area where we can make a distinction between prevention and enforcement, right? And it's a little different here where it isn't something, Councilor Garcia is correct, right? It's something that is difficult for us to prevent from happening. However, we do have mechanisms in place to enforce. Just this week, actually, I got a complaint from a constituent who was concerned about the frequency by which a neighboring short-term rental unit was being rented. And I was able to use our host compliance software, and I was able to get a very detailed rental history for that property, and was able to confirm, in fact, that they were not renting more than 1 per 7 day period. They're actually only renting a couple times per month. And so that is a tool that up until very recently, we didn't have at our disposal, but it's a tool that's very powerful and makes what resources we do have in terms of enforcement much more capable. And so I think that, I don't want to, I know councilors feel strongly about whether that provision should stay or whether that provision should be removed from the legislation. But I will say that to say that we don't have any enforcement remedies at our disposal isn't exactly true, because it is something that we can audit if we get a complaint about the frequency that's being rented and verify and follow up on based off of the information we get from host compliance. So I hope that provides a little bit more information.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that and all, but I still go back to my point that we're talking about really, for lack of better words, punishing everybody for lack of compliance in our regular ordinance, and we're also talking about only making strict changes that affect everybody for only 125 more because we're grandfathering in. And we're preventing some of our local people who grew up here, these will prevent some of them who I know personally from, because they're like 2 feet. And I heard you say 25 feet. I'll take it.
If I did, I apologize. I may have misspoke.
I'll take it.
It's 50 feet.
So, that is just, I don't know. I just really don't like that, because that really is the biggest, most unfair thing that I think that's in all of this. If we enforce good behavior, compliance and such with all of these other restrictions, what does it matter? For 125 permits, what does it matter? Keep in mind, this is income generating for the city. Not only that, because they pay gross receipts, but these people that come into our city, they spend money here. And we're not even talking about those kinds of monies. I'm talking about gross receipts strictly from rentals, from the rents, that are paid. These people they contribute to tourism and such. And now you're going to lessen the ability for many people to even do this, so that you may not even give out 125 more permits. I don't see the logic in it. And I think it's punitive, and it affects a lot more local people than you probably even know. I mean, I know there's people who say, oh, we have out-of-staters. We don't want those people infiltrating our short-term rentals, neighborhoods and such. But there's a lot of local people who use this. And much of this is going to hurt them, because they're barely in a position now to do this. And now with these stringent restrictions, it's going to put them out. And I don't think that's fair. I think maybe we should make a restriction that local people can do it, Santa Fe people, but I don't have that amendment here. So, Mr. Chair, that is the end of my proposal. I think I went through all of them.
Thank you. And Councilwoman Lindell, you had a amendment along with several other councilors.
Yeah, I don't have it pulled up in front of me. Sally, do you have it pulled up in front of you?
Can you see that? Does it need to be bigger?
Yes, please.
It's a little hard for me to tell what you can see because I have a weird screen in here. Is that better?
Not really. That is.
Okay. I'm happy to scroll down as you go along, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you. I'm having problems getting this pulled up on my computer, but it's already, this amendment has already been passed at Business and Quality of Life, correct?
Chair Rivera, Councilor Lindell, I believe that this was introduced after the Quality of Life meeting, so I don't believe they had an opportunity to review it, but I understand that the Finance Committee did recommend adopting this amendment.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't mind talking through them if that would be helpful. I can just sort of say what they are and let you speak to them if you'd like.
I can't pull them up. Go ahead and start, please. I'm trying to get them.
Okay. So the first item on this amendment sheet, and this is sponsored by the 4 sponsors of the initial legislation, would be an amendment to the table of permitted uses, which is in 14-6.1-1. And so the short-term rental use is a use listed in our uses table, which applies for the zoning districts. So you can see all of our zoning districts across the top. And this is considered a residential use. And currently, we noticed that this table is already not reflective of our ordinance. It's kind of an inconsistency. And so this is really just a cleanup amendment of our existing rules. So that's the purpose of this part. And I don't know if you want to talk more about it or move on to the meatier stuff, Counselor.
Let's move on.
All right. So the second suggestion proposed by the sponsors, the second amendment would be on page 7, line 16, after the period. And this is a subparagraph that speaks to transferability of permits. We insert the following new sentence. Upon the death of the permit holder, the permit may be transferred to the permit holder's spouse or domestic partner if the spouse or domestic partner submits a written request to the land use director within 90 days after the permit holder's death. The spouse or domestic partner owns or will own the property upon the settlement of the permit holder's estate, and the spouse or domestic partner does not already hold a short-term rental permit. And just to clarify, this is in a subparagraph that would apply only to residentially zoned properties that have a short-term rental permit, and it's a sort of exception to the proposed rule that permits cannot be transferred. And then if you'd like me to move on to the last item. The last item is an amendment on page 8. You'd strike lines 12 to 15 in their entirety and to strike the B, so you would no longer need enumerated subparagraphs in this part. And the provision that this refers to, I'm going to pull up my hard copies since I've got this one big on my screen here, but this is within the non-residentially zoned property section. And this was a provision that was proposed in the legislation. And it would, what it would have done is if and so on a non-residentially zoned property, if a multiple family dwelling development is located within 200 feet of residentially zoned property and contains 4 or more dwelling units, the land use director shall not issue short-term rental registrations for more than 25% of the dwelling units, rounded down. And so this was a provision that would have limited density within multifamily complexes that were within the 200 feet of residentially zoned property. And the Planning Commission did recommend striking this provision. Some concerns were raised about it, sort of as a practical matter and as a policy matter, and the sponsors are proposing to remove that as well. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like me to say about these. I can.
No, I think that's fine. Thank you.
Sure.
So, Jesse, are there any other amendments? I think those were the 3 main amendment sheets, but I didn't see anything else.
Chair, councilors, those are all the amendments that I currently have.
And I have a hand up by somebody named Virgil. Is that a city employee?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right. So we have the main document, the name consideration of the ordinance to consider, and then we can take each amendment at a time. If we'd like to do that, or accept all the amendments, or whatever the wishes of the committee are.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the resolution with all the amendments.
Second.
A motion and a second for all the amendments, along with the main ordinance. Is there any discussion? I do have a concern about the gross receipts tax amendment, Councilwoman Vihel Coppler, just because finance hasn't presented any of the numbers yet to the finance committee, so I'm not sure how much we're talking about, how much we're not talking about, what it means to overall GRTs. That's my concern about it. So that's with discussion. We do have a motion and a second though, but that's my concern. Councilwoman Vio Coppler.
I just need to remind you that the amendment on GRT doesn't amend the short-term rental ordinance. It amends a different section of.
Right, but
I mean, I don't know. I'm willing to work on the idea brought forth by Councilor Abeta. And I'll just, let the committee know that I'll be coming back.
Ms. Paez, that brings up the question again. How do you have an amendment to this ordinance that isn't really amending this ordinance? It's amending a separate ordinance.
Chair Rivera, committee members, the proposal is certainly related to short-term rental in that it would put a portion of GRT tax from short-term rentals into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So I think it's probably sufficiently related to the overall topic to be considered as a single bill. Ultimately, the bill would contain the pieces, and then the ordinances, there's separate ordinances throughout the code that we would scatter a few amendments in various places. For example, this also includes an update to our fire provisions, our fire inspection code, which is also in a separate section, but it is also related to short-term rentals. So I think as long as it's all sort of sufficiently related, it's okay to do it as a batch. There's some limits to how far you can go in that. The proposed amendment sheet, I do want to note, has a cross-reference. So it would amend the GRT section of our tax code, but it does include, as drafted now, sort of a cross-reference within the short-term rental, just to sort of alert people that there's that connection. So I don't know if that answered your question.
So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, let's have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Pisula.
Chairman Christopher Rivera.
Yeah, I still want to see the changes to the financial part of it, so I'm going to vote no.
Councilor Signe Lindell.
No.
Councilor Romana Beta.
I'm going to vote no, but I do want to continue to discuss the GRT option as I mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Councilor Joanne V. Hill Coppler.
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
The motion denied.
All right, so are there any amendments that we do want to consider that we may want to pass with this ordinance tonight and move it forward?
I would like to,
Lindell.
sorry, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I know that it's already been passed at Finance, but so did the last motion also, it included the bill and all the amendments. So I would make a motion to pass the bill along with the amendment submitted by the sponsors.
I'll second that for discussion. Any discussion on that?
Mr. Chair?
Councilwoman Vio Coppler.
I think it's important to revisit the 50-foot rule, and I would like to include the front half amendment that I made.
Is that friendly to the maker of the motion?
No. there's really no such thing as friendly amendments. Each amendment has to be voted on separately in terms of our procedure. I don't know if Sally wants to speak to that from legal, but we no longer have friendly amendments. Each one has to be voted on. All of those points in the Second Amendment that you brought, Councilor Vigil-Koppler, I went over all of those with a group from the Realtors Association today, and we talked about every one of them. And the idea that it's just from the front of the property, that really doesn't gain anybody, that doesn't gain anything for anybody. And, it would be eliminating it would be what would gain. But, this committee spent a lot of time talking about it and the density of short-term rentals. We looked at many, many maps from the GIS. So, well, could have been a short answer, Chair, turned into a much longer answer than I intended to. But so no, there's no friendly amendment. I'm sorry, but that's just procedurally.
All right.
Mr.
Any
Chair?
other discussion? Councilor Garcia?
Well, I know that we've had requests to ask the maker of the motion to amend their motion, so I will ask the maker of the motion to include my amendment in their motion.
Denied.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. We have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Basula, and this is for the ordinance, item J, along with the amendments proposed by the sponsors.
Chairman Christopher Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Councilor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Councilor Joanne Vigil-Koppler,
No.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
Nope.
Motion passes.
Thank you. So the other amendments, I assume, will still stay on there and go on to other committees, I assume. Is that correct, Ms. Pais?
Thank you,
I don't know if
Chair. Yes, my understanding is that we will go ahead and carry these through. The next scheduled stop, I think, is actually the public hearing at governing body. And at that point, I think full amendment sheets, parts of amendment sheets could potentially all be voted on independently, is my understanding of our current process.
Okay. And Councilor Abeta on the Finance Committee, can you have Finance Department send those numbers to myself and whoever else wants them once they're available?
Yes, I will do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Councilwoman Vigil-Koppler.
I would also like to have the GIS report that Mr. Isaacson referred to.
Is that okay, Mr. Isaacson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilor Vigil-Koppler. I'd be happy to provide that. Again, it's not a report per se. It's in a GIS map file. So maybe you and I can talk offline about how you'd like me to share that information with you. Just because it can be, I can give you a series of PDFs that show you in different areas of the city how these different buffer rings sort of impact adjacent properties, but it's not currently packaged in any sort of report at this time. So I'd be happy to work with you to get you the information you'd like to see in a way that's easily shareable.
Can you do it district by district? Is it still too big?
See, that's the thing. So it's you really got to zoom in almost at sort of like even smaller than a neighborhood scale. It's really got to be at sort of the scale of a few different blocks to really be able to see things clearly. So I'd be happy to talk to you again offline. Maybe we can do some sharing of screens on a Zoom call. I can show you the different areas and then pull some PDF maps out of the GIS for you that you can look at in more detail.
Okay.
But you and
All
I,
right.
I'll work to make sure I can get you whatever information is you'd like to see, Counselor.
Well, I do know it was testified to in the quality of life meeting, and now I'm learning it's not really a report. It's whatever you just said it is. So that's all. I do want it though. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for a great meeting. I know we had a lot of important things to talk about, and it's probably one of the longer meetings we had, so I appreciate you all hanging in there. Matters from the committee. Anything from the committee itself? Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted actually to thank the committee for their hard work. These have been complicated topics. I think we've brought up some things that we all want to spend some more time on. I think Councilor Vigil Koppler has brought to life the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that we need to find a way to fund that. At this point, we probably have some disagreements on how that needs to happen, but I think we all agree that it does need to happen. And I also wanted to thank you, Chair, for the way that you conduct these meetings. You move them along, you keep us focused, and I'm very, very appreciative of how you do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Lindell. It's much appreciated. Anything else from the committee? All right, matters from the chair. Again, this is Ms. Pisula's last meeting with us, I believe. Is that correct, Ms. Pisula?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so I just wanted to thank you again from the bottom of my heart for keeping me straight and in line the whole time, for putting together some great agendas and doing the minutes and doing the roll calls. Those have all been new for us and changes for us, and you've done a great job. So I'm really gonna miss you. I know you have some big shoes to fill, so hopefully people are up to the task. So thanks again. Under normal circumstances, we'd be having a little celebration in the council chambers with fruit and cheese and some other things, but I wish we could do that. Maybe at some point we will, but for now, just my heartfelt gratitude towards you, and I wish you nothing but the best in your new endeavors.
Thank you. It's very, very nice of you.
Mr. Chair?
Councilwoman Vigil Koppler.
I'm sure all of us would like to thank Ms. Pasilla. I forgot that today was her last day because I think I congratulated her at the last meeting. But, you know, I appreciate everything you've done. You've been just really stellar. And I'm not sure where you're going. I'm not sure, but if it's greener pastures and even if it isn't, if it's a better life for you, I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going over to SWAMA.
Oh, yippee. That's what I thought, but I was afraid to say so.
I will see some of you in the SWAMA committee.
Fabulous. Thank you.
There's no green pastures at solid waste.
No,
So-
but there's a lot of hazard waste because I was there last Saturday and it was cranking with lots of hazard waste.
Yeah. And then just one more matter for me. I'd like to, just thank everyone that helped clean up around Pete's Place this past weekend. It was great to see everybody out and about and doing a great job cleaning up that neighborhood. So that was much appreciated as well. With that, our next meeting is Monday, December 14th. With that, we are adjourned. We'll see you all tomorrow.
See you guys tomorrow.
Thank you, Joe.